Welcome to the Exploress. Time traveling through history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. The Queen of Jerusalem covers her ears as arrows pierce the stones around her. Trebuchets hurl projectiles at her refuge, shaking the stones beneath her feet. The onslaught has gone on for almost 3 days now. Her will is strong, and so is the Tower of David, but neither will hold her enemy at bay for much longer. She turns her face up, as if in prayer. How did she get here? She, a queen, hiding within her own city, besieged by none other than her eldest son. Let's travel back to the Crusader States of Outremer and find out. We'll walk once again beside Melisande and her sisters, experiencing the highs, the lows, and all the outright drama. We have a special guest along for the journey, author and historian Catherine Pangonis, whose book Queens of Jerusalem details the lives and times of these women in vivid detail and makes for a truly excellent read. Now, grab your crown, your sword, and get ready for a trial by combat. Let's go traveling. But first, a shout out to some of my patrons. My newest pirate queen, Angela. My warrior queens, Alexis, Amanda, Ika, Jessica, June, Neve and Sloan, Samantha, and Sarah. My Imperial Empresses, Alyssa, Bridget, Faye and Whimsy Soapworks, Katie, Samara, and Teresa. And my Lady Pharaohs, Cheryl, Kot, Kate, Kimberly, Laura, Sophie, Lori, and the fabulous Courtneys. This show would not be possible without the generous support of all my patrons. For just a few dollars a month, they get episodes early and ad-free, discounts on merchandise, full interviews with guests, and exclusive bonus episodes. This month, I'm sharing one about another Middle Eastern queen, Al-Khaizaran, and another about the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. To find out more, just go to my website. Before we start, a quick content warning. In this series, we explore a fraught and bloody time in the Levant's history, the Crusades. There will be some discussion of religious warfare and genocide in the areas we now know as Israel and Palestine. When we last saw Melisande, she was being anointed as Jerusalem's first Crusader queen. Girl's crushing it, but her husband, Fulk, is not exactly thrilled. Here's the thing, though. The haute cour, or high court, seems fine with this woman having so much power, even though it's not the norm, as William of Tyre, a big Melisande supporter, will write later.
The rule of the kingdom remained in the power of Lady Queen Melisande, a queen beloved by God, to whom it passed by hereditary right.
Which makes a striking change from what's been going on over in England. King Henry I recently tried to leave power to his daughter, Matilda, and her husband, and the English just weren't having it. So much so that it plunged the country into a bloody civil war. Here's Catherine.
There's this huge reluctance is the wrong word, but just refusal to accept a female ruler and a foreign husband. So it does show that the difference in situation between the unstable states of Outremer and the comparatively more stable and established states of sort of France and England. But Baldwin does seem pretty confident that his magnates will accept his daughter.
Fulk and Melisande are crowned just weeks after Baldwin II's internment. It is the first time a woman is crowned as queen regnant, not queen consort, in this region. And yet, Fulk does everything he can to sideline Melisande, instead of turning for advice to the woman who, I don't know, has lived in Outremer all her life and was quite literally raised to rule it. He insists on doing everything by his big boy self.
So their relationship was up and down, as you might expect from an arranged marriage between a sort of a young, headstrong, ambitious princess and a man like 20 years older than her, with very different views of what roles they should be playing. So the early years of their joint reign, following the death of Baldwin II, Fulk very much tries to sideline Melisande and keep her out of political life. We know that because there's lots of charters issued with his consent but not with hers. But this begins to sort of rankle with the local nobility, who don't really like Fulk and see him as an interloper, and he does things that annoy the local nobles. So he gives a lot of, offices and potential wealth to his allies that he's brought with him from France, rather than to establish noble families. So there's some political unrest around this, shall we say.
For a few years, Mel lets this slide. After all, she's grieving for her dad and has an infant son to deal with, as well as 2 younger sisters to look out for. She's also having to deal with her sister Alice's second rebellion, which she starts not long after Melisandre's rise to the throne. Alice is nothing if not an opportunist. Now that Dad's gone, she thinks, why not go for another power grab? So she gets some of the heads of other areas together and inspires them to fight against Fulk's sovereignty. It all comes to a head on the battlefield, and when the fight is over, Mel has to talk her husband out of straight-up killing Alice. Girl's probably at her wit's end. And then Fulk does something that Melisande will not ignore.
And then it boils over into something which essentially becomes a major scandal and almost a little civil war.
Who's ready for some grade A drama? In 1134, Fulk accuses Melisande of having an affair with her second cousin, a guy named Hugh of Jaffa. Hugh is a crusader, a count, and apparently a pretty sexy package. William of Tyre says that,
"In him, the gifts of nature seem to have met in lavish abundance."
One who was unfailingly loyal to Melisandre's dad, Baldwin II. Her dad and his dad were good mates, so it makes sense that they're friendly. But as William of Tyre understatedly puts it, he
was rumored to be on too familiar terms with the queen.
The sources paint it as an affair of the heart, because of course they'd say the queen was unable to resist her torrid feelings, when really it's probably a lot more complex. It could also be that Fulk himself starts this rumor to discredit his wife. This scandal has huge implications for Melisande. Her nose could be cut off for one. For another, her son could be disinherited. And then Fulk makes things even messier when he challenges Hugh to a trial by combat. He won't be the one actually fighting in it. A friend is going to do the swordplay for him, but the stakes here are incredibly high. Trial by combat is a specific brand of medieval justice. How to determine who's right in a thorny legal situation? Let's get out our swords and let God decide. 2 opponents pick up their weapons of choice and fight, gladiator style, until one is dead or no longer standing. The idea here is that God will intervene to guarantee the innocent party is victorious. God's miracles aside, this is not a great situation if you're the smaller or weaker of the 2 champions. Sometimes trial by combat is used by one burly man to get rid of a pesky neighbor. And here's a fun fact. If a man dies before the time of his duel, his corpse is carried to the dueling place anyway. There's evidence of at least one dead man winning his trial. His body was too heavy to be carried from the field of battle, and apparently that meant he won. This isn't the only type of ordeal used in medieval times. There's also the ordeal of fire, the ordeal of hot iron, and the ordeal of water. There's also something called the trial by cake, which is a lot less fun than it sounds. It involves trying to swallow a dry lump of consecrated bread without convulsing. Try doing that in front of an angry mob. But I digress. Back to Hugh of Jaffa. When the time comes for the trial, Hugh is a no-show. Instead, he ghosts Fulk, heading down south in something of a panic. While there, he tries to recruit some Egyptians from Ashkelon to go up against Fulk. Before they can fight, though, his soldiers desert him. Hugh finds himself at Fulk's mercy. Luckily, he has Melisande on his side. She gets Jerusalem's patriarch to intervene, making Fulk rethink his hasty choices. Folk also looks around and sees that a lot of Jerusalem's nobles aren't loving his behavior or his treatment of Melisande, because the heart of this drama is not how sexy Hugh looks in his Crusader armor, but all the ways Folk's been pushing his wife, the rightful queen, aside. Instead of losing all his lands and being banished, Hugh of Jaffa is exiled for 3 years. In other words, he's getting off pretty lightly. He books a ticket back to Italy and spends his last days relaxing in Jerusalem. He's playing dice outside a shop one day when a knight appears out of nowhere and stabs him. The city is shocked by this brutal assassination attempt and convinced that Folk is behind it. Melisande's reaction can be summed up like this: "Boy, you're really pissing me off." She makes it very clear to the High Court that you are either with her or against her, and those who go against Melisande are taking their lives in their hands.
All who had informed against the Count, and thereby incited the king to wrath, fell under the displeasure of Queen Melisande,
William of Tyre wrote,
and were forced to take diligent measures for their safety. Even the king found that no place was entirely safe among the kindred and partisans of the queen.
Her rage is so potent that Folk basically falls to his knees before her, terrified of her wrath and her power.
From this day forward, Fulk is apparently quite afraid of his wife and won't do anything without her permission, and they rule very jointly from that point. So this accusation, this affair, this treason is a watershed moment in their relationship, and from this point forward, Melisande begins taking a much more active role in government. And we begin to see the charters issued with both of their consent. And the chronicles are very clear that from this point forward, Melisande is really wearing the trousers, or at least very much on equal footing with him. She's no longer sidelined.
Way to get it done, Mel! It does seem like they make some sort of peace after this whole debacle, enough to conceive a second son, Amalric, and for Folk to commission a fancy psalter or prayer book for his wife as a little bit of an I'm sorry present. It seems they rule together jointly from now on.
From that day forward,
William of Tyre wrote,
the king became so uxorious that, not even in important cases, did he take any measures without her knowledge and assistance.
In 1143, when Folk dies tragically in a hunting accident, Melisande mourns him, weeping over his body and tearing at her hair in distress. Is she really sad, though? I mean, it's probably complicated, because Folk's death also means that the triumvirate is now a duality, and she gets to rule more or less on her own. Bye, Folk! With her sons Baldwin III and Amalric still fairly young children, Melisande gets to act as regent. She is recrowned with Baldwin III on Christmas Day, 1131. Interestingly, Baldwin III is 13 years old, the same age Melisande was when she watched her own parents crowned. We can only imagine how elated this 38-year-old woman feels about taking their place yet again.
With the king your husband dead, and the young king not yet ready to bear the business of the kingdom,
the Pope wrote to Melisande,
the eyes of all look to you, and on you alone the whole weight of the kingdom falls.
No pressure, but Mel is more than ready to rise to the challenge. And while her reign may be mixed in terms of its tally of successes and failures, she does some great things for her city. Under Melisande's rule, the borders are well defended, and art and architecture flourish. The people really like her, too. William of Tyre called her
a wise and circumspect woman, strong of heart, and not inferior in wisdom to any prince whatsoever.
And she earned that praise.
She really revamps Jerusalem and sort of, builds a lot of the medieval structures that we see today and changes the face of the Holy Sepulchre, undertakes a lot of architectural projects, and has established herself as a very close ally of the church.
Projects born out of passion, no doubt, but also out of some strategic thinking.
I think it's in no small part the fact that she had made massive improvements to the city of Jerusalem, that its citizens were so loyal to her.
She knows that it's a good idea to curry favor with the church, which has so much power here, and she wants to leave a legacy that no one can touch. As she says in a charter about her patronage of religious organizations, It is the custom of wise men to record in writing their works so that it is impossible to erase them from memory, and thus their successors may imitate what their ancestors have done. Also, remember her sister Yvette, the one who was held hostage for a year in her infancy? At this point, it's clear that she will never marry, but Mel finds a way to set her up nicely regardless. In 1138, she founds a new religious order at the convent of St. Lazarus in Bethany and endows it with a huge amount of money.
Which means that despite the fact that she enters the convent and doesn't make a political marriage, Yvette still ends up with a lot of power in the religious world. And let's not forget, this is the Kingdom of Jerusalem, so being powerful in the church is the same as just being powerful.
Both Yvette and Hodierna will remain very tight with their sister Mel, devoted to her for the rest of their lives. Speaking of Sister Hodierna, let's find out what she's been up to. Ready for a little murder mystery? Back in 1135, Melisande arranged a marriage for Hodierna to Count Raymond of Tripoli, an alliance that makes her one of Outremer's foremost leading ladies. They have 2 lovely children together, one of whom is named after Melisande. But in 1148, someone rides into Outremer who might jeopardize it all. This man, a guy named Alphonse, has a better claim to Tripoli than Raymond does, and he knows it. He stops over in the city of Caesarea, just one stop on his quest to take back what he sees as his rightful lands. But then, all of a sudden, he drops mysteriously dead. A rumor begins to go around that perhaps Hodierna and Raymond had him poisoned. It's a pretty big-time scandal, something that Melisande has to deal with, at a time when she's already suffering some pretty major blows. During her reign, she doesn't do much to assert her authority over Tripoli, Antioch, or Edessa, and Outremer's centrality starts to fray. That is one of the reasons the county of Edessa is recaptured by Atabeg Zengi, Lord of Mosul and Aleppo, in 1144. It is, by all accounts, a horrific massacre, and it shocks every Christian in Outremer. Although really, given what they did at the Siege of Jerusalem, I'm not sure why this comes as such a big surprise. Melisande calls a council of nobles to deal with the situation and sends an army to Edessa, though in the end, they cannot retake it. She also goes out of her way to aid the Syrian and Armenian refugees that wash up at Jerusalem's shores. She also sends word to the Pope, which is part of what inspires him and others to start calling for a second crusade. When it comes, it's led by the German Emperor Conrad III and French King Louis VII. Who happens to come along with him on this perilous adventure? Why, Eleanor of Aquitaine, of course, his fetching wife. She stays in Antioch for a time, spending months with her uncle, Prince Raymond of Antioch, and his wife. Remember Constance, Alice's daughter? When Alice first rebelled, Fulk and Baldwin II rode toward Antioch, planning to install a regent for little Constance. You know, someone who wasn't Alice. Hereditarily speaking, it's Constance who holds the keys to that principality. But Alice has never given up hope. So she was quite pleased in 1136 when a charming, elegant suitor named Raymond of Poitiers showed up asking for her hand in marriage. Alice was sure that, powerful as he was, he would help her claim true power at last. But while she was buying flowers and going dress shopping, Raymond secretly married her 8-year-old daughter, Constance. It seems that Fulk, the Patriarch of Antioch, and Raymond all conspired against her. This humiliation ends all Alice's hopes. She will die not long after. 11 years later, Raymond is sitting pretty as the Prince of Antioch, with Constance by his side. But while Eleanor is staying, a rumor spreads that she is having an affair with Raymond, who is also her uncle. Ugh. All of which is to say that, by the time these new crusaders finally reach Jerusalem, they have already had a bit of a tumultuous time. When they arrive in May of 1148, Queen Melisande and her son are there to greet them. There is a mighty procession, a lot of prayer, and a month later, a conference in Accra to discuss next steps. William of Tyre lists 40 of the people present at this important conference. Eleanor isn't on it, but Melisande sure is.
The fact that Melisande's name is on that attendance list and Eleanor's isn't, that can tell us a lot about the roles each of these women are playing at this time. We learn that Eleanor is in disfavour at this time. She has not been invited to this war council, despite the fact that she's a master of vassals. And we can see in contrast that Melisande, Queen of Jerusalem, is at this council among the first names mentioned in this list, which implies this status that she's playing an active role in the war strategy for this time, or at the very least, she's an important enough person to be given the respect of being there. So this is a fleeting mention. There is no sentence saying Melisande was doing this, this, and this at the Council of Palmyra, but the fact that she's there, we can read between the lines and deduce something about her status and her role and her influence at this time and in this very important military venture.
The result of all this conferencing is the Siege of Damascus, which is an utter failure for the Crusaders. It effectively ends the crusade. This is a major blow to Melisandre's rule and reputation, but the final blow will come in the form of her now grown and very bitter son. It seems that, while Melisande had a great relationship with her youngest son, Amalric, things have become, shall we say, strained between her and Baldwin III. He challenges his mother's regency, first by asking the Patriarch of Jerusalem to crown him separately from Mama. When that guy says no, Baldwin sticks his fingers in his ears, singing, "La la la la, I can't hear you," and makes a show of walking out of church one day wearing a Roman-style laurel wreath as if he had been crowned after all. And look, it's not impossible to understand his frustration.
Baldwin should theoretically be ruling from 15 years of age, but he doesn't actually manage to challenge Melisande for power until his early 20s, when he does go and say, I want to be king, I want you to step aside and give me full power in the kingdom. Melisande refuses.
Keep in mind that her dad left the throne to 3 people, Fulk, Melisande, and their son Baldwin. And though perhaps she was only given that much power to ensure Baldwin III would receive his inheritance, she isn't about to give up her power for anyone.
Legally, his mum should cede power to him, but at this point she's so powerful and has so much influence, has been ruling for so long, that it's actually practically very difficult to get her to step down if she doesn't volunteer.
Mother and son decide essentially to split the kingdom down the middle. Melisande will retain Jerusalem and Nablus, where her power base is, and Baldwin will take control of Tyre and Acre, the major trading ports. But Baldwin III continues to fume, angry at his mom for stealing what he sees as his throne, his birthright. By 1152, he is angry enough that he's ready to go to war. He raises an army, showing up in Jerusalem in force. Melisande has the gates closed to him, but the people of Jerusalem don't dare to refuse their king entry. A son going up against his mother in Outremer's holiest city. What a sight this must have been. The city's patriarch, head of the church, throws his lot in with Melisande. But despite the church's support, she cannot fend her son off for long. She retreats with her people to the Tower of David, and Baldwin III throws everything he has at it.
So incessant were the attack that the besieged were denied any chance to rest.
One source says,
They, on their part, resisted with all their might and store to repel force by force.
For 3 long days, her tower is pelted by arrows and ballistas. Finally, tired, injured, and feeling pretty defeated, Melisande concedes. The whole affair underscores one fascinating fact: how much power Melisande has garnered.
The fact that her son has to go to such great lengths to take power from his mother does tell us just how powerful this woman was. It does tell us just how much influence she wielded and how well established she was in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and that she's playing a very important and very prominent political role.
Ever the wheeler and dealer, she agrees to cede Jerusalem to Baldwin, but only if she can keep Nablus, and if he agrees that he will never try to challenge her for that land. She continues to be very influential and important there, playing an active role in the lives of her nieces, Constance of Antioch and Melisande of Tripoli, and in her sisters' lives as well. Speaking of Hodierna, who really seems to be Melisande's true ride-or-die sister, are you ready for murder mystery number 2? Let's go back a couple of months. Despite all the plotting they may or may not have done together, it seems that Hodierna and her husband Raymond weren't all that happy. Eventually, like her sister before her, Hodierna is accused of being unfaithful. In 1152, things got so bad between the couple that it broke out into an all-out jealous feud. So bad, in fact, that Melisande went to Tripoli to try and patch things up between them. When that didn't work, she resolved to find a way to dissolve her sister's marriage. She takes Hodierna back to Jerusalem, and Raymond is so good as to escort them from Tripoli. On his way back home, he is ambushed by a mysterious Islamic sect called the Hashashins, the title that will eventually evolve into the English word assassin. It is the first documented instance where this group killed a Christian, and it's not quite clear what their motives were for starting now. Which begs the question, did Melisande and Hodierna have something to do with it? It's hard to say, but her husband's death does make Hodierna a very powerful lady. Baldwin III swoops swiftly in, setting up a triumvirate of power between Hodierna, her 12-year-old son, and her younger daughter, Melisande, which means that Hodierna is going to rule more or less on her own, for a little while at least. This is everything their sister Alice wanted in Antioch, but was never quite able to grasp, and it's possible that Melisande helped her get it. In this way, Mel and her sister keep pulling strings from their lofty perches. Melisande may have lost her throne, but she hasn't lost all her power. She remains influential in church matters. She and Hodierna essentially rig the election of Jerusalem's patriarch so that her favored candidate wins out. But all good things must come to an end. In 1161, Melisande of Jerusalem contracts some kind of fatal disease. After months of hard battle, she passes away, and it seems that a lot of people are sad about it. Even her son that kicked her off the throne, William of Tyre, ruminating about Melisande's 30-year reign, says that
She was a very wise woman, fully experienced in almost all affairs of state business, who completely triumphed over the handicap of her sex, so that she could take charge of important affairs.
And that,
striving to emulate the glory of the best princes, Melisande ruled the kingdom with such ability that she was rightly considered to have equaled her predecessors in that regard.
Ambitious, opinionated, passionate, these queens of Outremer helped shape the Crusader States, opening a path to power for the women who came after them. And while they may not always have triumphed, they left a powerful legacy in their wakes. Thanks for listening. If you like the Exploress, tell a friend about it, leave a review wherever you listen, or become a patron of the show. Quite shortly, I'll be posting a bonus episode about what happened to some of the daughters and granddaughters of the women we just spent time with. You can also shoot me a message telling me what you love about the Exploress. Hearing from you always delights me. Make sure you check out Catherine Pangonis's wonderful book, Queens of Jerusalem, which you can find wherever good books are sold. You can find show notes at my website, theexploresspodcast.com, as long as some pretty cool pictures. You can also find me on Instagram at the Exploress Podcast. Much love to Carly Quinn for all her help with the show, to Joshua Stackhouse for our amazing new theme song, and to the Tudor Consort for their beautiful choral music, which you can find at my website in the show notes or at Free Music Archive online. Much love also goes to the following for their vocal stylings: Joffrey K. and my brother John. Until next time.